I'm just here to tell you the truth about Georgia football heading into 2025. And here's the thing, it's not what you think. That's what we're going to talk about tonight on this edition of the How About That Dogs Cast. And the first thing we are going to do is level set. We are going to reset everything about Georgia football now that spring practice is over. This is our post-spring education, and we're going to educate ourselves. We're going to learn a little bit about what we know about Georgia. Last year's in the rear view, and we're looking ahead to 2025. We have to start with just how young this football team is. Now, I know that Kirby has stepped to the podium in the past, and I tell you that he tells us the truth. Even with that, there were people in the Georgia Bulldog media who listened to Kirby say, man, we're young, we have this many new players in here, and this year is a struggle. It's a fight, a good fight, because Kirby likes to be out on the grass. That's where he lives. That's where he feels most like a coach, like himself, coaching players up. It was different this year. And it was different because it wasn't just him saying that and the Georgia Bulldog media hearing that and thinking, yeah, okay, Curbs, whatever. That's not what this was. The thing we can't let go of is how young this Georgia team is. Kirby, once again, was not lying. If you don't believe me, just listen to this number. Somewhere between 40 and 45% of Georgia's current roster, the 84, are redshirt freshmen or freshmen. Then add on top of that, you had 5 transfers that are now part of the program. That's 47 players, 40 to 45% of your entire roster in their first year of college football or participating in their first spring practice at the University of Georgia. Clearly, that's damn near half your team. When I tell you that they're young, that's not an exaggeration. Is it an excuse? No. Is it a reality? Absolutely. What does that mean? It means that Kirby Smart and his staff were out there, knuckles to the ground, coaching, trying to develop these players, push their growth, and get them to buy in and believe in everything that the Georgia football program is. That's the only way that the Dogs have a shot to be competitive this season. I know I have sat in this chair and told you how talented they are, and I stand by every word of that. But as we move into 2025, the reality is that talent has baby teeth. They are very young. Now, the bright side of that is once we get into the season, what we see tried out on the field against Marshall to open the year, that team will not be the same team that you see down at the end when they play Georgia Tech. It won't even look the same. Even if they run the same plays, the way they go about it is going to look so much different. And if you need an example of just how much a team can change from the beginning of the season to the end of the season, just look at last year's Georgia team. I spent time last spring telling you that there would be players that were showing up in the middle of the year and then in the latter part of the season and making plays for Georgia because they would have to. I was right. Chris Cole, anybody? KJ Bolden, anybody? The thing that makes this feel different is that this number feels, probably actually is higher than any number that we've seen from Kirby Smart, certainly in the last few years, and absolutely in the age of the portal and all the ways that players can move around right now. So this is different. It's different. It doesn't mean that Georgia's season is sunk, but it also means that you cannot run blindly into the season and just pronounce that Georgia's going to make it back to Atlanta to compete for the SEC title. If you have to sit here now and look at what could happen in the fall, and you level set what this season and the expectation should be for it against what last season was, here's a reminder. Last season, the University of Georgia won the SEC championship. So when you look at 2025 and you ask yourself, what is the expectation for this year? Well, the expectation is that Georgia will always be in the hunt because of the coaching, the facilities, the recruiting, the talent on the roster. That is the expectation. Can they do that? Yeah, they can. But to just assume that it's going to be a walk, that they're just going to make their way to Atlanta and their spot is reserved, that is an overstatement. That is an overstepping of what this team is, at least right now. And it's not fair to them. We all grow and learn every day. At least if we're doing life right, that's what happens. You're learning something every day. You are not the same person now that you were a year ago. Or not even 6 months ago. Hell, I'm not even the same person now that I was in January. The way this thing works is you grow. You screw it up and you get better. The mistake is life, right? You have to embrace it. You have to welcome it. That's what these guys are living through right now, every day, in every way. And you might say, well, this is Georgia. It should not matter. Georgia, under Kirby Smart, should not ever have to say they're rebuilding. I disagree. What makes Kirby special? What makes Georgia special? What makes them any different than any other team in the country when it comes to the realities of NIL, transfer portal, a big senior class that had carried itself over for 2 or 3 years because of all the exemptions and extra years that they were made available? Why are they any different than any other program in the country? They're not. That's the spoiler. They're not. And if you don't believe me, listen to Coach Smart. He told you. We have seen this coming. We have been building along the offensive lines, along the defensive line. We knew we were going to have to do some things. It's morning in America. It is reckoning day. That's where we are. It is time for the rubber to hit the road. This team is every bit as talented as any other team in the country. They're definitely not as experienced as some. But again, if we're level setting, and the reason you should have hope as a Georgia Bulldogs fan, none of this happens in a vacuum. So everything that Georgia's dealing with, the other top teams across the country are dealing with it too. Now, granted, maybe to a lesser extent, but the reason Georgia is still going to be in this conversation is because of the infrastructure, because of the man at the top, because of all the work they've already done. That's what's going to allow them to have a shot this fall. This is a very, very young team, and this is a rebuilding year for Georgia. They still might win 10 games. That is the reality of Kirby Smart's Georgia Bulldogs. It can be a rebuilding year, and they still may win 10 games. I don't know if I'm going to sit here today and go ahead and forecast 10 wins. I'm definitely not making any predictions right now. All that'll come later in the year. But that is the reality. It can be a rebuilding year, and Georgia can still win 10 games. They might even win the conference. That just tells you the power and the strength of the program that Kirby Smart has built in Athens. If you don't think this is a bit of a rebuild, let me just rattle off a couple of things here real quick for you to remind you of the turnover that's facing. Literally thousands of snaps are walking out the door in Athens, or have walked out the door. And now Georgia is looking to rebuild their entire offensive line, save one position essentially. They're looking to rebuild their defensive line, save one position essentially. They are looking to reinvent or rebuild their wide receiver core. And a note on the wide receiver core for a second while we're there. Going into last season, I even sat here last spring and said this offense could be the best Georgia's ever seen. Now, in retrospect, you might be like, you are nuts. Thing is, I'm not though. Because if you talk to the people inside the building, the thing that they counted on, the basket they put their eggs in, was that Ra Thomas and Colby Young were going to be wide receiver and options 1 and 2 for this team last year. Colby Young was a monster, and they knew it, and that was going to free Ra Thomas to have a big year. Then all the other pieces underneath, tight end, slot, all that stuff would have worked itself out. And then we know what happened. Due to circumstances off the field, those two guys weren't available. So now this offense was left to do the best it could do with what it had. Even depleted like that, and by injuries, they still managed to be SEC champions. But it shows you how a team can change in the split of a moment. You can see how the trajectory for a season can change based on one bad decision, one bad injury, something like that. Now, factor in how young this team is. Factor in that, oh yeah, by the way, I wasn't done. The DBs have to be rebuilt. And oh, by the way, they're having to replace a quarterback too. A competition for sure. A leader for sure. Still going to be a new guy taking snaps as QB1 when Georgia plays Marshall on August 30. That's the truth. That's the level set truth. Georgia is extremely young, probably the youngest they've been under Kirby Smart. Certainly a shadow of the 2021 and 2022 teams, which were just stacked like cordwood with NFL players. Not the same. These players could develop into those players. They could develop to be NFL players, but they're not that right now. And we all need to remember that as we start to look at the schedule and what we expect from this team in 2025. Here's the good news. It's draft week, NFL draft week. And when it comes to being mentioned in terms of teams that put players in the league in the NFL draft, Georgia is still Georgia. Once again, the Dogs are going to put players in the league at a rate that not many colleges across the country are going to be able to keep up with. As far as development and growth, like I was talking about earlier, what happens in spring practice and in fall camp and then through the season and over your time at Georgia, all those things come together and they churn out NFL players. They are an NFL factory. You've got NFL scouts out there saying the way Georgia is run is different. That's like an NFL program. You go there, it is a gold mine of coaches and players. And we know that if they're in that program and they stay, that if we draft them, it's pretty much a home run. Like, nothing's for sure, nothing's guaranteed, but it's pretty much a home run. You know what you're getting from that kind of player, from that school. The Dogs, when they show up in Green Bay, they could take over tomorrow night because there's a chance that we're pretty confident that Jalen Walker and Michael Williams and Malachi Starks have a shot to go in the first round. All that is by players that have already done their work for the University of Georgia. We still have to talk about an entirely different group of players that have yet to even begin their work for the Dogs. So the portal is portaling in Athens. It's doing what it does, as they like to say in the streets. And Georgia, as I mentioned, is no different. They have to navigate the comings and goings of the transfer portal just like every other team in college football. Now, in Georgia's case, we can split this into two halves. You have the winter window, and then you have the spring window. So let's look at the winter window. I'm not going to run through everything that happened back then. That's already been done. But the one thing we can point to is that the Dogs took one major loss when Damon Wilson decided to go to Missouri. Good luck to you, kid. Still don't understand it, but we're moving on. If you look at who is in Athens now, of course, the splash, the big player who was in the portal that the Dogs pulled in would be Zachariah Branch out of USC. And we saw him at G-Day flash his wares in the red and black for the first time. You can tell that the kid's twitchy, explosive. He can get down the field. He's a playmaker with the ball in his hands. And I, for one, am supremely excited to see what he's going to be able to do in the red and black. But now we have to tackle what's going on here in the spring window. And what exactly does that look like? The portal opened up, and I guess to most Bulldogs, it might be happy. We might be able to say, well, we're happy that, there wasn't some huge outflow of players who were jumping into the portal, because that speaks directly to the culture at the University of Athens. It speaks directly to the fact that the players get the bigger picture and that they want to be there. But of course, there were a few players that left, and that's okay because that's the world that we live in now in college football. But the thing is, there were no losses that we wouldn't see as being too dramatic. Like we all would say, yeah, that one makes sense. So you look at a departure like Branson Robinson. That's a young man who essentially needs a reset button on his career, not to any fault of his own, not for Georgia's fault. It just, he got knocked off schedule with injuries, so he needs a fresh start to see what he can do with it. So he and the other players that have left Georgia so far in the portal, it's all that sort of story. There's nothing here that's going to make us be concerned, and we should cheer all those young men on for their time that they spent with Georgia, as well as wishing them the best in the future, because at this point, they just need a new opportunity. So Georgia, you could say, has been fortunate so far in the transfer portal as far as who has decided to leave. The other players that left, they left because they were in trouble or they've had some off-the-field issues or whatever it is. That's fine. They too are looking at a situation where they are probably better off with a fresh start. But on the flip side of that, a lot of people out there, I mean, the streets are talking and they're saying that Georgia has been dominant in terms of how they are utilizing the portal. Now, really, is anyone surprised? Is anyone actually surprised that that's the way this thing might shake out, given Kirby Smart's history as a roster manager? I, for one, not surprised. But the Dogs did pull off the trifecta, and don't think for 1 second that this was not some orchestrated play, okay? That's not how Kirby works this sort of thing when it comes to recruiting, whether it's traditional or in the portal. There was a plan in place, and on Easter Sunday of all days, Georgia dropped a big egg and cracked open the news that they had 3 different players that were coming in via the transfer portal. I'm going to start here with a nice player out of the University of Miami. His name is Joshua Horton, a clear depth piece for Georgia along the defensive line, a place that I just mentioned they're having to rebuild. So you need a big body. He's a Georgia kid that Georgia recruited. They didn't get him in the high school battle. Now he's coming back to the state. He's out of Langston Hughes. If you know anything about Langston Hughes and high school football, you understand that defensive linemen out of Langston Hughes are always a pretty good bet. He had a few injury issues when he was at Miami, nothing major, and now he's coming back home. Looks like a really good addition for Kirby Smart and his Dogs, but they weren't done. Like I said, there were 3. The player that seems to maybe be generating the most buzz after starting off slowly would be the running back out of Illinois, Josh McCray. He is the definition of a pile mover. You've got players at Georgia right now in the running back room that can make explosive plays. You've got players out there that can catch the ball out of the backfield. What you don't have, and especially with the loss of Branson Robinson and the potential still yet to be tapped of Roderick Robinson, what you don't have a guarantee of is a guy that can get you 4 yards when you need 4 yards. Not a guy who's going to get tripped up in the backfield. A guy who is going to move the pile and get those tough yards when you absolutely have to have them. That is exactly what Josh McCray is. He's the definition of that kind of player. He's the kind of player that when he hammers on you, and especially if he's splitting carries, by the time you get to the 4th quarter and they've hit you with body blow after body blow, he's the kind of guy that's going to make you want to quit. Think Zamir White. Right? Not as fast as Zamir White. I'm not making that comparison, but the kind of guy that is going to attack the defense when he runs the football. That's what Josh McCray is. And although this started out a little slow, momentum started to build to the point where a lot of people are saying, I am the most excited about Josh McCray and what he might be able to do in the backfield, especially when you pair him with the other pieces. Now, of course, this comes back to how the coaches plan to use them, so on and so forth. But what did Kirby tell us at spring practice? From opening day, the thing we have to do is be able to run the football and stop the run. And if you look at the moves that have been made here specifically in these transfer portal moves, it is to do those 2 things. They want to stop the run, depth along the defensive line to keep fresh players, and run the football when they want to. A big-bodied back that can move the pile and has a history of showing you on tape that he can do that when his number's called. So those were the first 2. There's one more, and this is the young man who a lot of people think might be the gem of the whole bunch. He was the top-rated player at his position in the portal at a position of need for the University of Georgia, and that is Elo Medozi. He was playing at Army last year. He's about the same size as Nolan Smith. I'm not going to rattle it off. He's like 6'3", 200 and something, but they're about the same size, not exact. And all he did last year was rack up 6.5 sacks. Long. A wingspan that allows him to scratch his ankles when he's standing up straight. This is the kind of player that is an absolute impact move for the Dogs in the transfer portal as they move into 2025. You know this is how it's going to go because A, it has to. The numbers just aren't there. And when you bring in a player like Medozi and put him at a position where he can get after the passer and do other things that they're going to ask him to do, this young man is going to play early for the Dogs, and he is going to be an impact player for Georgia all season long. And Given the kind of athlete he is, he's probably going to play on special teams too, which is a win-win bonus up. You're just stacking value at this point with this young man. He is the kind of player that at least one of the ranking organizations out there had him as the best player, the top player at edge in the portal this offseason. So this looks like a win-win-win for Georgia. Again, the portal is portaling, and Kirby Smart is doing what Kirby Smart does when it comes to recruiting and roster management. So, yeah, they're young. Yeah, they're having to rebuild, but the coaching staff is doing all the things that you need them to do to get ready to meet the challenge come fall. From here, we know that there's going to be a new quarterback for the University of Georgia, and it may very well be Gunnar Stockton. I have told you that I think that is who it will be. I do, however, feel really good about whoever the number 2 is. If it's Gunnar, clearly I'm going to be good about that. If it turns out that it is Ryan Puglisi who is the number 2, I feel really good about that too. That's really a good feeling when you look at what we have to look at next, and that is the schedule. Rebuilding year or reloading year? Yes, Georgia is reloading. But when you look at everything else that they have going on, you have to give consideration to the fact that this might, just by the sake and nature of the way everything's coming together, be classified as a rebuilding year. You look at Marshall, Austin Peay, and then Tennessee before Alabama comes to town at the end of September. I think it's fair to say, and again, this is not a prediction, but right now I would probably have the Dogs going 3-1 through that push. And then if you look at the second 4 games, I would probably say the same, 3-1, which would put them at 6-2. And then if you look at the next 4, I would probably say 3-1. That would have the Dogs finishing the regular season at 9-3. A lot would have to happen, but I don't know that that's good enough to get them back to Atlanta. So let's circle back to what we said earlier. Can Georgia get back to Atlanta and win the SEC championship in 2025? Yeah, they can. But when you judge it against what happened last year, where they are currently wearing the crown as champions, can we expect Georgia to win the SEC championship? Because that's what they would have to do to be as good as they were last year. And I don't think that's a fair expectation. So if I don't think that's the fair expectation, and you look at everything else that we've talked about here in terms of what they're going to have to rebuild, how young they are, and just the moving pieces that are having to be put together, I think a level-headed expectation for Georgia is probably 9 wins and potentially more. Again, this is not my prediction. All that stuff will come later. But if we're going to be honest and we're going to take a look at the truth about where the football program is right now, I think that's completely fair to look at that and say, this seems like it makes sense. This seems like where they could end up. The season has to play itself out. None of us know what's going to happen between now and then. This will not be the same team at the end of the season as it is at the beginning. We know full well that there's a lot of things that are going to change. But given where we are here in April, I feel pretty good about saying I think the floor for this Georgia team is probably 9 wins. But watch this space. Come on back. Follow up with me later, because you know I'm going to have those predictions for you down the road. I'll put some skin in the game, and then you can all come back and point and laugh at me later. So what's the truth about Georgia football heading into 2025? The truth is they're a young team. They are inexperienced, but they are absolutely talented. Can they meet the level of success that the 2024 team had? Another SEC championship. Can they get back to Atlanta, win that game, and then put themselves back into the college football playoff with hopes of something more? Absolutely they can. But it's not fair to the young men, in my opinion, to sit here and say that we expect that to happen. Not with everything else that's going on inside the program. Not with the fact that you have 40 to 45% of your team that literally are playing their first season in the red and black. Not when you have to rebuild the offensive line, defensive line, reinvent the wide receiver unit, flesh out what the defensive backs are going to look like. not when you have to manage the portal the way Kirby Smart does. All of these moving pieces, I just don't think it's fair to sit here with an expectation that the Dogs are going to walk out there and win the SEC title in 2025. Can it happen? Absolutely. Do I think it's going to happen? It's too early to tell. But I know one thing's for sure. This staff and everybody in the football facilities and the program are doing everything that they can do to put Georgia in the best position to take another shot at the crown here in 2025. That's why we all watch. That's why I'm going to be here with you talking about it. None of that's going to change anytime soon. Go Dogs!
Told them, how about them fucking dogs? That's what I told them.